Andrew, I gotta ask, what is the story behind this?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Craig, because I have a public announcement for everyone just to know. This is pickleball. And I wish it was something cooler, but be careful if you're over the age of 40. When someone says, oh, old people play this sport, like this is for senior citizens, and they say, let's play some pickleball, just be careful. And I ruptured my Achilles heel. And I've never had a sports injury. This is the first one, but if you take anything from this speech, this is it. Be careful with pickleball, because it did this to me.
You know, we've had a lot of conversation this morning about net zero, China, and now pickleball. These are obviously very important topics for everyone.
It is a dangerous situation, this pickleball.
So Andrew, you have had a track record of starting businesses, growing them to sufficient scale, exiting. You've had two exits, at least two exits, and now you're involved in a number of companies. Where you spend most of your time is at Emerge. Tell us a little bit about Emerge.
Yeah, so I started Emerge. I was at my first company, Global Trans, and we started. I noticed that how did we get freight as a brokerage? Global Trans is now the fourth largest broker in the United States with Worldwide Express combined. And I was like, how do we win our freight? And I said, I asked my guys, how do we win this freight from all these big shippers? And they showed me these spreadsheets that the shippers would send us. And they would send us a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet. We'd put our rates in there. And I was like, this is how we win freight. And I was like, I said, what is the technology these shippers are using to do their bids? Which is, if you think about it, every truck you see on the road starts with an RFP. Every freight event starts with, everything you see on the road starts with some kind of shipper doing an RFP event, request for pricing, with their carriers and brokers. And I realized that there's no technology. Every TMS in the United States it's an execution layer. That's how they execute their load. And the TMS needs to know, which carrier to use at what price. You have to load that in from the RFP event, but there is no technology. The TMSs don't do that well. So I said to myself, that's what I want to do next as a technologist in this industry, is build that. But most importantly, I realized that most shippers lock out carriers from the events. And I realized that the average shipper only brings in 20 asset-based carriers to their event. And that's a major problem. I think it's better if there's 3,000 carriers, 3,400 carriers on our system that have 20 trucks or more. We have 400 shippers using us now, so we have all the big any trucking company with 20 assets that are in our system. There's 3,400 different van, reefers, and flatbed carriers in our system. The average shipper only brings in 20 asset-based carriers, and they bring in our 20 brokers, usually about 40 carriers to their event. So in other words, if you have 100 trucks, there's a 99% chance that you're not connected to any particular shipper. And I think that's a big problem. And I think it reared that in the last 3 years when capacity got tight and shippers didn't have capacity, didn't have trucks to go to. And so I felt like giving away this free platform, and then how we monetize at Emerge is we open a door for carriers outside the shipper's network to go connect with them, and the shipper could connect with new carriers.
In terms of what Emerge specifically does to enhance that bidding process, what is it is it increasing the number of bidding participants in there? Is it operating different bid cycles than what is normally expected? Where's the sort of magic in the platform?
Well, during COVID, shippers had to run more events than ever. It was like almost a weekly event for the biggest shippers and a quarterly event for the small shippers even, because they didn't have capacity. Their route guides broke down. They needed to go get more capacity. So they were doing bids constantly because you want to have contract rates, especially then because spot rates were 30, 40% higher than contract rates. So you had to run events every couple weeks for the biggest shippers, and the systems that are out there, there's two systems that a shipper would use, but only the biggest shippers would have a RFP event. Those systems didn't do mini bids well. That's what we call them, mini bids. You have to run a very quick bid cycle, and that's what we gave them. We gave them a system that's very easy to use, that they can run a continuous bid cycle. And I think that that's the best way to run your network, is to always be running bids, and always, instead of locking a rate in for a year, you're better off doing quarterly events, because even your brokers could sharpen their pencils. Everybody's going to add a cushion on a yearly event, because no one knows what's going to happen 6-7 months from now. So everybody puts cushion on that rate, every carrier and broker. But if you run a quarterly event or a smaller event, the shorter time cycles, the better you're going to pay in trucking, because everybody could, especially brokers could actually take more risks. A broker can't take a risk on a yearly event or as much as they can on a quarterly event. And so I think it's best to run if you can run, the more bids the better, if you could run instead of doing a yearly event, which is what it was before COVID and what it's actually turning back into now. So I like to educate shippers that it's the best shippers that pay the least amount, that run the most efficient trucking networks for drayage, van, reefer, flatbed. That's what our system does. Run a lots of it. They have bids every month or every quarter at least.
Andrew, you and I met in 2018, I think it was. We were at a BB&T conference down in Florida. And he said something that has stuck with me ever since. It's been 5 years. Is that there are 300,000 people in the United States at the time. This was 5 years ago. We've seen a lot more growth in that work in freight brokerage that do nothing but price and capacity discovery, and how inefficient that process is. Now, you built Emerge understanding that was the case, and that you wanted to solve for that, I believe was sort of the foundational thesis behind it. How far in that journey have you gotten with Emerge?
Well, like what I told you then was, I remember being a broker, and I heard a carrier. I was at a carrier once. I visited a carrier when I was at Global Trans, and I saw what happens in the morning at your typical carrier. And there's 100,000 of these guys. Most of the carriers rely on brokers. The tail end of carriers. If you don't have 20 trucks, if you have 20 trucks or less, which most of the carriers have, they rely it's like mostly broker they're getting. And if you sit with any of those guys in the morning, the first call typically is, one of the top 5 brokers, and the second call is, and it's just constantly, they're just taking call after call from brokers. And I feel like that, we have a spot market at Emerge. I always felt that is the biggest, one of the biggest problems in our industry, is that there's there's probably more people calling trucks, trying to book trucks, than there are actually trucks. If you think about all the carrier sales reps just in Chicago alone. And, we haven't, I think that's something we want to solve over time, but no one's solved that problem yet. It's still a thing, where a carrier has to, most trucks are still booked with a carrier sales rep calling the carrier in the morning. And just think how inefficient that is, because you're a carrier and you have a truck that you need to move. You're going to take the first load that pays you, if I want to make $2 a mile, or now it's $2 a mile. I want to make $2 a mile on this load. You're going to take the first guy that pays you $2 a mile, even if you have to deadhead 20, 30, further to get it. If you just waited 3 hours, you could have, maybe there's a load that was more efficient and paid a little more, but you don't have time for that. So that's what gives the biggest brokers the advantage, right? Because they have all these people. They can call trucks in the morning, and the first one, they have the guy with the most carrier sales reps, gets the capacity first. But it's a very inefficient model. It hasn't been solved yet. The digital brokers try to do that. They weren't able to do that. It's still a thing that's happening. It's still a big problem.
So Andrew, you arguably are one of the most successful founders in the brokerage space. It's sort of we're maybe on our 3rd or 4th generation of freight brokerage. Sort of go back to sort of the early days of like C.H. Robinson and then American Backhaulers, or that Gen 1. Gen 2 is the Global Trans, sort of that Gen 2 business that sort of has risen to be one of the largest players in the market. What do you observe today that is different than when you started your journey in terms of the state of the freight brokerage world?
Well, I think there's way more freight brokers. I mean, everybody that worked at C.H. Robinson and Coyote in the early 2000s started their own freight brokerage, pretty much. There's still probably 100 freight brokers that have $20 million or more in revenue per year. We're starting to finally, I've never seen this before where it's a bloodbath. We're starting to see a lot of them fail. It's such a tight margin business now. The margins aren't 15, 20% like they used to be. They're about to, if you're happy to make 13%, 12% now as a big broker, and it's getting worse and worse every year. But we always knew that was going to happen. I think it ends up at, around, it's never going to go down to 0, but it's going to be around, under 10% eventually. And you have to survive like that. And that's why, they always say, like, you have to be as efficient as possible. And your biggest cost is that person that's calling and booking the truck. That person is about 5% of that 12% you're making. Just the person that's booking the load, calling the load, just finding the capacity. So, if you still have that, in 5-6 years where you're relying on a carrier sales model and your margins are only 9%, and your admin costs are about the other a couple points at least, you're not going to, you have to, how do you survive as a company, right? Because you're not going to be able to even attract investors or pull a profit. So, I think that it's going to go away eventually, but it hasn't. It's kind of crazy. I thought everybody thought it would be gone by now, but it's still it's 98% of the loads are still booked by a carrier sales rep at a broker. For the $100 billion brokerage industry, it's a person. It's not digital. It hasn't been digitized at all.
It's funny. The event you and I met, I also met Dan Lewis at that event, and I think about, because it's easy to sort of look at specific events in your life and sort of say, I remember where I was when this event happened. And I remember, Dan's journey is, at least sort of his first journey is the Convoy story is now a part of Flexport. So, we'll see where that ends up. But in terms of his desire to sort of digitize the market, obviously we've not accomplished that, or did not accomplish that.
No.
Where did he get it wrong?
Yeah, so Convoy was trying to, what the digital brokers did that's different, and is that they had, their whole idea was, let's buy the loads just like everybody else does. We go on an RFP event, we'll bid on the freight, we'll use investor money to buy the lane. So we'll buy, if the lane's at $2 a mile, we're gonna bid $1.80 a mile. We'll lose money on it, which was okay back when you could raise a lot of money. We buy that lane, we show revenue growth, and we attract more investors because they think, oh, look at this high top line revenue growth. They weren't looking at margin back then. There wasn't any margin on the digital brokers. But they realized that you need so much scale. You need, and I would say you probably need about 5,000 loads a day, 4,000 loads a day to have a carrier audience. The only companies that have carrier audience are C.H. Robinson, maybe the top 4, maybe top 3 brokers, TQL. Where you're a carrier, you have a log in the morning. If you look at your average carrier in the United States, they have DAT open for sure, truck stop, and maybe their top 3 brokers, C.H. Robinson. That's scale. You need a lot of scale. The digital brokers never got there. And that's why even Convoy tried to open their market up 3 years ago, which got them in big trouble with DAT. Because DAT is very, you can't, they thought you can't build a load board and use this at the same time. So DAT kicked them off the platform. Now they're stuck and they're like, okay, let's bring brokers on our platform. And that didn't work either because brokers don't trust each other. They got a few carriers, but they knew that didn't have the scale. You need 4,000 to 5,000 loads a day for a carrier to come to your system every day. Otherwise, you're relying on a carrier sales rep. And that's what still is happening at these digital brokers. They say, hey, we're digitizing freight, but the only way to digitize freight is to have enough scale in your marketplace, meaning enough loads that you don't need a carrier sales rep to be calling all these trucks in the morning. Otherwise, you need to still keep that. And they never got to scale. They never got to, to 4,000 or 5,000. They were like 1/3 of that.
You're suggesting the reson that the freight market has not digitized, the freight brokerage market specifically has not digitized, is because the platforms that are out there have not achieved sufficient scale to be able to affect that.
Right. With the exception of the big brokers. But I would say this, the problem is they still have to go with a person onto, remember, 93% of the trucks you see on the road now are contract. It was 30%, 70-30 during COVID, spot versus contract. It's back to 93% of a shipper's freight is contract. So the spot market's pretty much dead. So they still have to go on an RFP to win that freight with a person. They buy that freight, and then they can digitize. The biggest brokers are, and that's why I always say, when the whole digital broker thing happened, I was like, wait, C.H. Robinson's digitized. Like, they buy the freight just like Convoy does. They throw it on chrobinson.com, and the carriers buy it. So the biggest brokers can do it, and that's why they could still pull, C.H. Robinson still makes pretty good money on their 13% margin because they are pretty much digitized. But they still have to go on an RFP event every single time and buy that lane. So it's not like you're not going to disrupt anyone with the current model. So it's not like, and the digital brokers never got to that point. And then I would even say like the biggest guys aren't trying hard to make it. They still, if you ask them, they still have most of their trucks being booked by the person because it's the easy button. And that's their model. Their model is we have a big carrier sales rep force. They have a relationship with the carrier and they sell to the carrier. So even though they have the scale to do it, it still isn't digitized even for the biggest guys. But it's not, I don't think anybody has to worry about digitization and some big broker just taking over everything like everybody was kind of worried about 5 years ago.
So Andrew, unfortunately, we always have great conversations. I always want more time with you. We don't have that time, but we do have time for one more. So your founders in the room that are aspiring to build a business, have a successful exit, or just build a large enterprise, period. What advice would you give them?
Well, it was much easier 3 years ago, but the digital brokers pretty much took all the money for the investors. Now investors are kind of shy from this industry. I say, there's still a lot of money. There's still a lot of ideas that haven't been done yet. This industry hasn't been digitized at all. Everything, it's getting there, but I think there's still so many ways that you could start a business in this industry and do something big. So I think it's just harder than it's ever been because, again, there's no money. You have to bootstrap. You have to figure out how to make money without burning money and spending investor money at this point. It's back to what it was 10 years ago.
So make a profit.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thanks,
Appreciate it, everyone. You good?
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's great.